Good evening. My name is Hank Stevenson. I'm the co-founder of the Arizona Agenda, a daily newsletter about politics and government, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona debates, so that voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. Voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time. Do that via email, debates@kc-a.com. You can also text it in 408-302-1810, or you can call it in by landline 480-973-1253. We may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. And tonight we'll be hearing from candidates in Legislative District 1, which covers the Prescott area, including most of Yavapai County from about Black Canyon City up to Sedona. As this is a primary election debate, candidates are competing against each other for their party's nomination. All registered voters, including independent voters, can vote in the primary. Independents can choose a single party ballot they wish to vote. And we'll kick off the evening from hearing from the candidate. We'll hear from the candidates for the Senate for about an hour, and then we'll move on to the House candidates. Candidates, you'll have about 1 minute for your opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for responses to voter questions. We encourage an open exchange of dialogue between opponents. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments after they conclude speaking, you may do so. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and we remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. All right, let's get to the candidates. For the GOP nomination for the State Senate in Legislative District 1, we have 3 candidates: Republican Ken Bennett, Republican Steve Zipperman, and Republican Mark Finchem. And Senator Bennett, why don't you kick us off with your opening statement?
Thank you, Hank, and thank you, Arizona Clean Elections Commission, for sponsoring the debate. I am Ken Bennett, Arizona native. My wife and I have been married for over 42 years. We have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. I'm a businessman. I got a degree in accounting from Arizona State University, and I was CEO of our family business, which is a fuel distribution company up here in the Prescott area, for almost 25 years. But I started also during that time in public service. I started on the Prescott City Council for 4 years, served on the State Board of Education, served in the Arizona Senate for 8 years, from 99 to 2007. And the last 4 of those 8 years, I was president of the Senate. I also served as 6 years as Secretary of State. And now I'm back in the Senate representing Legislative District 1. I'm a conservative. I've balanced budgets every year that I've been in the legislature, whether the governors were Republican or Democrat.
Okay. And Mr. Finchem?
Representative Finchem, former representatives in the Arizona House of Representatives. Good evening, and thank you very much for tuning in. This is a valuable service offered by the state of Arizona and Clean Elections. I didn't enter politics until I was 57 years old. Before that, I trusted the people who were in office to do the job that I had sent them to do with my vote. I have a bachelor's degree from Grand Canyon University in state and local public policy, graduating summa cum laude. A master's degree from the University of Arizona in legal studies, many people would say law and economics, from Rogers Law School. Served 21 years as a DPS officer in West Michigan, fought fires, was a level 3 paramedic, and a law enforcement officer. I have one of the strongest conservative records from 2014 to 2022 in the Arizona House of Representatives. In fact, many of you probably already voted for me once for the Secretary of State office in the 2021-2022 election cycle. I look forward to answering whatever questions you might want to pose.
Great. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Zipperman, you're up next.
Well, my name is Steve Zipperman. I'm a constitutional conservative. I am a veteran. and I am not a professional politician. I am also not part of the establishment. I've never held a high office like the one I'm seeking now. I have a bachelor's degree in the physical sciences, zoology with 20 units of chem majors chemistry. I have a master's degree in business administration, and I have a law degree. I passed the California bar on my first attempt. I practiced law for just under 30 years. I understand legal language. I've negotiated tens of thousands of written agreements with legal terms of art in them. I believe I'm eminently qualified for this position. I ran 2 years ago against Ken Bennett and lost that election by 256 votes. It was very close. This time, I believe we will have a much better result. So my background is very consistent with what a legislator needs to know in order to do their job effectively.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, let's just jump into some questions. One of the biggest jobs of a lawmaker is to help craft, hopefully, and at least vote on a state budget. Can you not hear us, Senator? Well, hopefully that'll get worked out before we'll go to somebody else first. So I want to know from each of you, what was the most damaging cut in that budget, in your opinion? And this is a two-part. I also want to hear what area of government could and should have been cut deeper. And former Representative Finchem, why don't you start us off?
Well, I think, quite frankly, the budget that I left when I left office in 2022, this budget is quite a bit larger. Over the 8 years that I was in the House of Representatives, we took a very aggressive fiscal responsibility position. You may recall that we were in debt up to our eyeballs under Janet Napolitano and, quite frankly, President of the Senate, Ken Bennett. There was a budget we had to mortgage our state buildings. Beg your pardon?
Sorry, I think we got a little delayed interruption there. Continue on, sir.
Okay, so we had to mortgage all of our state buildings. In the 8 years that I was in the House of Representatives, I was a part of paying down that debt to the point where we became debt free. In fact, we delivered to the current occupant of the 9th floor, Katie Hobbs, a $1 billion plus surplus because of our fiscally responsible stand. There are folks that would say that we passed the budget in this last budget cycle. That's not exactly a true thing to say. So, frankly, I think that and many of the voters, I believe, would agree with me, the state government has gotten way out of proportion. We have programs that should have been cut that perhaps weren't cut. And I don't believe that we cut deep enough, especially when family budgets are being cut so severely by inflation. We need to trim our sails and make sure that our government is affordable for the people who are paying the bills, and that would be our taxpayers.
And if I could follow up, sir. I don't believe I heard an area of state budget specifically that you would like to cut there. Do you have a couple of examples you can provide?
Well, one of my big issues is when we extend offices like the registrar for more than 2 years. We have got a number of state agencies that should have been cut that weren't cut. I would take a very close look at, for example, the judiciary. If they're dismissing cases that should be heard, they're not doing their job. So we need to hold them accountable. And quite frankly, the only tool that the legislature has is the power of the purse.
Okay. And Mr. Zipperman, I think I'll just kind of bounce around so that we don't end up one person getting the first word or the last word every time. Mr. Zipperman, would you like to take a stab at that one? Where should we cut from government and what maybe shouldn't have been cut in that last budget?
Right now, education receives 56% of the entire state budget. I believe that education should have been cut, and I believe there's a lot of fat in that budget to allow cutting. The proficiency levels in English are approximately 44% statewide, K through 12 in the public schools. Mathematics, the students are 21% proficient. These numbers are not acceptable, and they handicap our kids. They won't be able to get into the best universities. They won't be able to get the best jobs. I have a whole different approach to budgeting, and I want to push this to the full extent of my ability. I've been in government work before. I am a veteran. I was at Walter Reed, and the guy who came into our department, our manager, came in with a stack of catalogs, and he said, "You guys have until the end of the day to spend $400,000." And I said, what are we supposed to buy? And he said, "Anything you want. It's the last day of the fiscal year, and if you don't spend it, we lose it next year. So spend it on anything you want." That happens in our state every single year, and I believe there's a lot of excess money that's budgeted. Typically what they'll do is they'll take a department and they'll add 10% for inflation to last year's numbers and give them that amount. And if they don't spend it, they'll lose it. But of course, they always do. So I believe that a lot of money could be saved by switching over to a zero-based budget plan where each agency must justify the expenditures that they have in mind for the following year. If they can't justify it to the satisfaction of a committee from the legislature, then that budget won't happen. They won't get the money. So they need to justify the spending. And if we did that, I believe there's enough waste in our government here in Arizona to be able to pay enough so that we don't have to pay an income tax every year. I think income tax is something that could be eliminated if waste and inefficiency was done away with. Okay.
And Senator Bennett, you're the only one who had to actually press a button, red or green on that budget. What was not cut deep enough in that? And what areas did you feel were cut too deep, if any?
I was concerned with some of the cuts, for example, about $900,000 to the Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind. That's going to really hurt their ability to transport students back and forth from their homes to the schools. But the biggest disappointment I had with the state budget that was just adopted, and the reason why I voted no, was that I requested, and I had told the governor months ago, and also legislative leadership, that I wanted between $2 and $3 million out of $11 million that's already sitting there at the state treasurer's office for election integrity, for an election verification project. We could do what Maryland does, which is after the counties count on whatever election systems they use, then the ballot images are transferred to the state, and the state tabulates those ballot images on an independent system that none of the counties use. Or we can do like Idaho does and transfer the ballot images to the state and release publicly the ballot images and the cast vote record that shows whether those votes on those ballots were added up correctly. So I voted no on the budget almost exclusively for not getting an election verification project for this November's election. I think it's very possible that Arizona could have a very close race, either in the presidential race or the U.S. Senate race, one of our congressional districts. And I think that the voters deserve to know that each of the counties tabulated their ballots correctly. And that's what I would have done at the state level. And had they included that, I would have voted for it. But there were other things in the budget that concerned me. They took about $26 million out of the underground storage tank fund that our business and all of the fuel distributors around the state. There's only $30 million in there. So they're probably going to delay monies that people that pay into that fund are supposed to receive to upgrade their tanks, clean up spills and things like that. So there's some minor areas here and there, but the main one I was concerned about was no money for an election integrity project for this November's election.
Okay. I want to make sure that we're giving the public a chance to chime in with some debates or with some questions for this debate. So I'm going to repeat this one more time. If you've got questions, the email address to send them to is debates@kc-a.com. You can text them into 408-302-1810 or call them into 480-937-1253. Okay. I want to stick on the budget for just one more question here, but I'll keep it brief for all of you. There are two sides to the budget equation, both spending and revenue. And part of the reason that we are in the situation as a state that we are is not only because our spending has increased, but because we've decided to offer up large tax cuts that contributed to this deficit. I wonder, just by a show of hands, do any of you believe that we should reconsider some of the tax cuts that contributed to this deficit as a longer-term solution to this problem? Undo tax cuts?
No.
Okay, I didn't see.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Should we we're talking about cutting spending to solve this deficit. Should bringing in more revenue via canceling the tax cuts be part of the equation?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I didn't think I'd get a hand there, but I thought it was worth a shot.
Hank, I think it's interesting to note that Arizona's income tax used to be 9%. During the Symington administration, it was cut from 9 to 7. During the 4 years that I was Senate president, we had a Democrat governor, Janet Napolitano. We cut it from 7 to 4.9. And then during the Ducey administration, it was cut from 4.9 to 2.5. Mr. Finchem's microphone kind of cut out, at least on my side, when he was talking, but I thought I caught the last end of him saying that when I and Napolitano left, that the budget was underwater. That is not true. All of the budgets that I did with Janet Napolitano were balanced. We left over $1 billion in the state's rainy day fund and cash balances. We had paid off hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. The deficit that Mark was talking about occurred after Napolitano, or after I left. Napolitano had 2 more years, and one of the Republicans that replaced me, Tom O'Halloran, who later switched to a Democrat, he and a few others increased spending when the revenue was decreasing in the early 2000s. And that's what created the deficit. There was no deficit when I left in 2006. And any reference by Mark that I and Napolitano left the mess is incorrect.
I don't agree with Mr. Bennett's response. When I look at it, 2008, there was a real estate collapse and crisis. There was a banking crisis at that time. And the entire economy, United States wide, nationwide, our economy was in a shambles. And I don't know that you can say that one administration caused it at a state level. I think that from the federal level, there were some mistakes made. There were some mistakes made at the state level in terms of spending, but that's been going on for a long time. But I don't see where that was a state or a governor driven decision. There may have been some contributions to it, but the entire nation was upside down. People lost their jobs, people lost their businesses, people lost their homes. I was intimately involved in that crisis, trying to get people out of it. And that's something that was far more than just an administration at the state level.
My comment was misrepresented. So yes, Mr. Bennett was the president of the Senate at the time. When he left, one of the things that we have to remember is in the Senate, you're expected to be forward thinking, looking on the horizon, what is coming? And with all due respect to Mr. Zipperman, he's right. We were undergoing an economic crisis that was budding, if you will. So yes, it was Janet Napolitano and the predecessor for Mr. Bennett, Senator Bennett, that got us into this place where we had to mortgage our buildings. My point was that for the 8 years I was in the House of Representatives, we put our shoulder to the wheel and we got ourselves dug out of that ahead of schedule, under budget, and we saved the taxpayers millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in interest payments. I don't ever want to see us go into that kind of a position again, where we have to mortgage state buildings. That is irresponsible governance.
And those buildings were not mortgaged while I was president of the Senate. When I left the 06 budget, it was balanced, and we had over $1 billion in the rainy day fund and state cash balances. We had paid off hundreds of millions of dollars of debt on state buildings, school buildings, and things like that. So We were thinking forward when I left a budget that had over $1 billion surplus in it. It was the 2008 budget where revenue started to dip, and Janet Napolitano and the then legislature increased spending while revenue was going down. And within about a year and a half, they got themselves into a $3 billion deficit, wiped out the rainy day fund completely, and started doing some of the things that Mr. Finchem mentioned. But when I left in 06, the state budget was balanced and we had over $1 billion in reserve.
I'm wondering why you had $1 billion in reserve and didn't return it to the taxpayers. Seems to me it's their money. And if you have $1 billion surplus in a state budget, that means to me that you're taxing people too much, and that some of that money should have been given back to the people. Maybe some of it should have been set aside for a future unanticipated event, but $1 billion is a lot of money.
Well, as I said earlier, we did the largest tax cut in the history of the state during the time that I was Senate President and Janet Napolitano was the governor. We reduced the state income tax from 7% to 4.9%. We eliminated the statewide property tax that used to be used kind of as a slush fund to help balance the budget. So we did return money to the taxpayers. And but every organization, whether it's a family, a business, or the state of Arizona, should have a few percent of its resources in reserve. And that's what the state rainy day fund, it's actually called the Budget Stabilization Fund. But we left $1 billion in the state's rainy day fund. And that's on top of having done the largest tax cut in the history of the state at that time. So we did return actually probably $1.5 billion in those tax cuts. With a Democrat governor, we returned to the people of Arizona and still left $1 billion in reserve.
Okay. That was a good session on the budget, but we've got lots to talk about. I want to move on to immigration and the border. And I want to ask, I'll make an assumption that all of you plan to support HCR 2060 on the November ballot. That's the ballot measure that would require employers to verify immigration status of their worker and make it harder for migrants to obtain public benefits. Just tell me if I'm wrong. Do any of you plan to not support that?
It's already the law.
Yeah, that's not what HCR 2060 primarily does. The focus of HCR 2060 is it creates a state crime of entering Arizona illegally directly from a foreign nation, and that's Mexico. But there's people from 160 or more countries that are entering illegally, so it's not just Mexicans. But the main thing that HCR 2060 does is it creates a state crime, so that if local law enforcement, police departments, sheriff's deputies, DPS, if they see people crossing illegally down on the border, not going through a lawful port of entry, they can arrest and detain on a state crime. Whereas right now, all they have are federal crimes. They can call the Border Patrol, and if the Border Patrol can't get there in time, it's kind of moot. But Senator,
that's exactly what I kind of want to ask about. We've been down this path as a state before, have we not?
No.
I mean, no. SB 1070, this is very, very similar to what that provision is.
No, it's not even close.
No,
Hank.
it's not.
This isn't anywhere close to SB 1070.
Okay, Representative Finchem, let's start with you. I want to know, let me rephrase this. So what should this, is this going to solve the problem? And if not, what should the state be doing to address immigration? And what can the state be doing, considering this is really a federal issue in many ways? Okay, so
first of all, it's a multifaceted problem. It's not going to, one solution is not going to be the be all and end all of taking care of this issue. When you come through a port of entry, that means you've been vetted by Border Patrol. When you come through a point of entry, that means you're committing a state crime. We've never had that before. SB 1070 had absolutely nothing to do with that. And for all the hyperbole that comes out of the left, that this is going to destroy business, well, hey, take a look around you. Business is already being destroyed by inflation and all the other policies of open borders. What we are doing is we are empowering law enforcement, sheriffs, with a new statute, and it's a tool that they can use. Now, will they use it indiscriminately? I highly doubt that, because they don't have enough funding, they don't have enough manpower, but it is for the most egregious offenses. When you can go out on Facebook and have a kid drive down to Nogales on the other side of the border and bring home a whole carload of people and drive them into the interior of the state just to make a few $1,000s, that's part of our problem. That is not being enforced by the federal government. And you may recall when Katie Hobbs was running for governor, she had this grand statement, I have a plan. Well, I've said it many times, I'm going to say it again. Now would be a really good time for you to tell us what your plan is, Katie, because so far your plan has to do nothing but leave it up to Joe Biden, who immediately upon taking office took down every single safeguard that President Trump had put into place. President Trump did a fabulous job in shutting down the daily crossing quota that was coming across. He was interfering with the cartels. Now we have basically an unrestricted cartel environment. So this is one small step in that move towards reestablishing control. We do not have operational control over our southern border. And for anybody who claims that we do, Alejandro Mayorkas, you're a liar. We see the evidence of that in every single county. In fact, every county in America is now a border county because these people are being moved around the country by the federal government. So the referral that voters are going to have an opportunity to vote on, I think will pass overwhelmingly because it gives law enforcement another tool that they can use that is meaningful to apprehend, hold, and repatriate individuals who have no business being here.
I'd like to address this question, please.
Go ahead, sir.
First of all, HCR 2060 doesn't do what it says it does. It's better than nothing, but it's not much better. It says that to Secure the Border Act. That's the name of the act. The problem is it does nothing to secure the border. People still come freely over the border without any restrictions whatsoever. It's once they get here, they can be charged with crimes to make it more difficult for them once they're here, but it does not secure the border. There are two ways that the border can be secured, and I'm in favor of. I'm not against this statute. I agree with Representative Finchem. Yes, it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's nowhere near adequate to deal with the issue. First of all, Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says very clearly that if the state of Arizona is being invaded, that the federal government has an obligation, a legal duty to defend us, and they're not doing it. So I would file a lawsuit. The legislature needs to do it because the governor won't. As you guys know, she is a Democrat, and she has no interest in having a firm border policy. So the first thing you do is you file a lawsuit, State of Arizona versus United States of America, for violation of Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. I believe that lawsuit is absolutely winnable. I've come up with a lawyer who will take that lawsuit, and with someone with money who said they'll pay all the legal fees. I brought this to some people in government, Warren Peterson, the president of the Senate, and the chairman of the Free Enterprise Club here in Arizona, Jake Hoffman. I brought it to both of their attention. They think they have some other means, and I think they're planning on this HCR 2060 to be that other means. So they weren't willing to take that lawsuit up. But once I'm elected, I will push for that. I think it's a very good lawsuit, wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime. And I believe that you could seek an injunction as part of that lawsuit that would force the federal government to enforce the border. In addition, one other thing that could be done is another wall like President Trump came up with. I thought it was working very well when he was in office, but there were still some gaps in it. I think that we could have a wall on the Arizona side of the border, maybe 50 feet, within 50 feet of the international border. And we could pay for it with crowdfunding. So I've talked with a lot of people who are willing to make a donation towards paying for that other wall. And then Arizona can be free from people freely coming and going with drugs, with human trafficking, with the problems that we're stuck with because the federal government isn't doing its job.
And Senator Bennett, to give you a chance to chime in.
Well, we were very happy in January when the governor gave her State of the State address, and I'm going to read her quote. "We cannot move forward without first addressing Washington's ongoing failure to secure our southern border." And a few seconds later, expressed her support for our neighbors, sheriffs, small business owners, and local law enforcement near the border who work every day to offer solutions where the government has failed. The top priority of the Republicans in the House and the Senate this year was to put a border security bill on her desk, which we did. It was Senate Bill 1231, sponsored by Senator Champ. It basically had the elements of what's now in HCR 2060, but when she vetoed it, we had no other choice but to go around her veto by going directly to the people. I believe the majority of Arizonans will support this. It is a tool. It allows local law enforcement officials to arrest and detain people that they see crossing in. So I think it's much stronger than what Mr. Zipperman gives it credit for. It's not a solve-all, but it will allow local law enforcement to arrest and detain. And it has the other aspects about filing false information to get employment or government benefits and creating state crimes for those. But those are already illegal. Those are just strengthening those aspects. The real new something that this is doing is creating a state crime of entering Arizona illegally without going through a lawful port of entry.
All right. And since you threw out a quote, I want to read one from Yavapai County Sheriff David Rhodes that about this HCR 2060. "Our main concern is that this ballot initiative contains no funding for local law enforcement." This is your local sheriff. It sounds like he is in favor of the idea conceptually, but the way that it's written, I would like to hear each of you respond to the sheriff. Is this going to cost more money? Why would lawmakers put this on to local law enforcement without providing additional funding? If we've got a serious problem that needs to be addressed, those usually take money. Mr. Zipperman, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I think it's a Band-Aid. This particular resolution is a Band-Aid to fix the problem. If you have edicts for law enforcement to take action, but they don't receive any funding to be able to do their job, and there would, if this is truly being enforced, there will be a substantial cost associated with enforcement of it. Like I said, it's a tool, it's one means, but if you don't fund it, then the law enforcement agencies are already stretched pretty thin with what they're already doing. The size of Yavapai County, for example, it's huge. And there are times in the middle of the night, it might take you 3, 4, 5 hours to get a sheriff's officer to your location. They just don't have the manpower to be able to enforce this law vigorously. So I agree with Sheriff Rhodes. I think he's on the right track, and I think it costs a lot of money to do that enforcement. If you put up a wall on our side of the border, I don't think that it costs that much once it's in place. It will be a deterrent to some extent. The other thing, of course, is the lawsuit that I talked about. If the judge rules consistent with the Constitution, then that stops the problem. The lawsuit requiring an injunction for the federal government to do what it's mandated to do under the Constitution. I've taught the Constitution here in the Yavapai County area for the last 5 years, and I understand the Constitution very well, and I understand what the Founding Fathers had in mind. If you don't have a border that's truly enforced, you don't have a country. And so It's very important that we have that and that we use it.
Thank you, sir. I want to move along to the other two. What do you say to the sheriff? How should he pay for this? Representative Finchem?
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Zipperman, I mean, that works when you have an executive who follows the law. Joe Biden has been very specific about not following the law. In fact, he doesn't give a bloody damn about what the Supreme Court says. They tell him you can't forgive student debt. What does he do? Signs an executive order to forgive student debt. So when you have an executive branch that has gone rogue in the governmental structure of our country, our Constitution was built for a moral people who would follow the law. That's a problem. So it's correct that there is no specific funding to enforce this particular statute, but I would challenge. I love Sheriff Rhodes. In fact, I think he's been a fantastic sheriff. But there are very few statutes where there is specific funding that comes in for anywhere. It is a tool that is at the discretion of law enforcement to use. We call it prosecutorial discretion. If there is a situation, if you've got a onesie-twosie situation where you've got one person coming across the border, but you have some other higher priority, okay, that's a law enforcement decision that management has to take. What is the greater good for the general welfare? Now, when you have tens of thousands of people coming across, thankfully, they're not all coming to Yavapai County. We would see a pretty significant increase in population overnight. My point here is that even though there isn't specific funding, there is funding. You know, the legislature in this last budget added $5 million to law enforcement. Now, in my opinion, that should have been $50 million, if not $500 million. Because if we don't have a secure border, and one of the gentlemen has already said it, if we don't have a secure border, we don't have a country. This goes back to security, security, security. Border security, cybersecurity, and election security. Without those three things, we are not a nation. So I believe that there are some opportunities to reallocate finances without having to cut law enforcement budgeting. I don't want to micromanage law enforcement because the sheriff's offices around our state know what their priorities are. They know the things that the people who have elected them want them to pay attention to. I think what we do need to do is find other areas where we can either reallocate funds or, well, quite frankly, reallocate funds. That is my biggest concern because it is the sheriffs of this state, and we got basically 5 that are playing hardball. We've got a few that just refuse to play. That would be Santa Cruz and Pima County. They're open border sheriffs. They're facilitating the movement of people north. And yeah, I'm calling them out. They don't even interact with the other sheriffs around the state. But you've got guys like David Rhodes, Mark Daniels, Leon Wilmot. These are guys who have dedicated their entire departments in controlling the border where they can. So when we start seeing a mechanism, a tool for them to use, and we don't give them funding, I think that's an opportunity for the legislature to step in the next session and make sure that they have adequate funding to do the job.
Okay. And Senator Bennett, what good is a new law without money to enforce it?
Well, first of all, Hank, we have to remember that local law enforcement are interacting with these people already. But when they catch them, they don't have anything to do other than call Border Patrol. And if they can't get there in 6 hours or a day and a half or whatever it is, they kind of have to let them go. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that are appropriated for law enforcement between the state and all of the counties. And especially for the border counties, they are spending huge amounts of time and resources already, chasing these people that are in high-speed chases and abandoning people in the desert and breaking into private homeowners' farms and ranches and homes. They're already spending the time dealing with these people. They just need, and this is what Mark Daniels, the sheriff of Cochise County, told me on the phone about a month ago. We need a tool like a state crime so that when we observe people, when his deputies observe people crossing the border illegally, not going through a lawful port of entry, they can arrest and detain. Now, when they detain in a county jail, if those fill up, the concurrent resolution says that the state will make available space in the prison beds if they need that capacity, and they probably will. And so we will absolutely, and I commit to appropriate the monies that the sheriffs and the prison officials tell us begins to occur as they're able to arrest and detain these individuals. We will have some additional expenses, and I will fight to get them the money to support it.
The detention doesn't happen on the first offense. The first offense, they get charged with a misdemeanor. If they come back, then they get potentially faced with a felony. But this resolution does not detain people for long periods of time in custody.
It absolutely allows them to arrest and detain Steve, on the first offense, whether it's the first offense is a misdemeanor, they have to arrest and detain and process them through so that if they commit it the second or a later time, they can charge those subsequent ones as a felony. Absolutely, they can arrest and detain on the first one. You're mistaken there. I'm sorry.
The whole idea of this law came from Governor Abbott in Texas. And the whole idea of the law is to convince people who are stopped and detained, to convince them to go back to Mexico or wherever they're from, and to charge them with a misdemeanor. It wouldn't take more than a day, maybe 2 days. Charge them with the misdemeanor and tell them, if you come back, we're going to charge you with a felony and we're going to get serious about this. But the detention on the first stop is not like a long-term, highly expensive operation. It doesn't
I didn't
take
say
that
it was.
much.
I said it might be a few days. It's a misdemeanor the first time. Exactly what you just described will hopefully happen. They'll be instructed that you now have strike one. If you come back again and get strike two, it's a felony and you will have more serious consequences. But they absolutely can arrest and detain on the first strike.
Hank, I would add here that it has become common knowledge against border crossers that if they are arrested for a crime in the United States, that is a bar for them, especially if it is a border crossing crime. That is a bar for them to become a legal citizen for 10 years. That's immigration law. That's what President Trump is now talking about for self-deportation. Individuals who have a hope that they might receive some kind of amnesty under Biden, that ship has left the dock. It's not going to happen. So we will see self-deportation because people really do want the good people that are here, not our enemies that have infiltrated our country, but the good people that are here that really do want to come here for a better future. They're going to leave on their own. We saw that happen in President Trump's first tenure. People left the country on their own because they didn't want to get jammed up with something that would bar them from applying for legal citizenship for 10 years. So that's one of the things that it's kind of like when you're driving down the road and you see cherries and berries up. The first thing you see, all the vehicles approaching that do what? They step on their brakes. Even though that officer is already tied up with a traffic stop. It is deterrence by observation. And when you make that visible, that's the best police work that can be done because you're not threatening anybody. They're simply taking care of it themselves.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions in from the audience that kind of hit along similar themes. So I'm going to try to paraphrase these. We've got one for Senator Bennett and one for Representative Finchem. Let's start with you, Senator. So this year you have stymied Republicans' ability to pass some of their top priorities out of the legislature. And we could go on to a host of things. Largely, we're talking about the transgender bathrooms bills. There were quite a few of those referendums, especially that Ken Bennett was the lone Republican no vote. And I think the voters, especially Republican voters, want to know how they can trust you to represent their interests, given some of those votes in the last session. I want to give you a chance to address that.
There were over 500 Republican-sponsored bills in the Senate alone this year. I voted against a handful of bills. In a couple of occasions, it was because they were unconstitutional. I supported the Kavanaugh bills that said biological males should not be in private spaces, locker rooms, bathrooms, showers, whatever, with girls. I supported the Kavanaugh bill that said if a child is requesting to be called by a different pronoun than their biological sex, that the parents need to be either notified or give permission. I supported all of those bills. But when he took two separate issues and put them on one bill and says we're going to put it on the ballot, that violates the single subject rule of the Arizona Constitution. And interestingly enough, after I voted that bill down, the president of the Senate came up to me and said, Ken, that wasn't going to be one of the bills that the speaker and I were going to allow to go onto the ballot anyway. But so I haven't stymied anything unless it was unconstitutional or unless it had critical flaws. I was the only bill against a Freedom to Move Act that one of our organizations wanted, where government couldn't monitor, tax, or limit the number of miles that we drive. I'm fine. I told the sponsor of the bill, I support government not being allowed to limit the number of miles that we drive, but to monitor, then you've got to have an exception for city fleets, counties, state government fleets. They monitor their vehicles just like we monitor vehicles that aren't private business. And on the tax side, I want someone to tell me how are we going to require electric vehicles or other alternative source vehicles to pay for the maintenance of the roads if we pass something that says we can't ever tax them.
You charge them when they register their vehicles. That's when you charge them for the maintenance of the roads.
Okay, but the answer that they gave me was, we will estimate the miles that an average electric vehicle drives each year, and we will figure out how much electricity is equivalent to a gallon of gasoline. And if we charge a gallon of gasoline 18 cents of tax, we'll charge something on the equivalent energy of electricity. They still would have prohibited us coming up with a mileage estimate for how much a vehicle used. These are very heavy vehicles, these electric vehicles. So until somebody can answer the flaws that were in some of these bills, I don't vote with the Democrats, but I don't blindly vote with Republicans. I vote on the merits of every bill. And if there are even small but critical flaws in a bill, whether it was Republican or Democrat or anything, I'm going to point those out. And if they can't or won't be fixed, then I'm going to vote against it. And the handful of times when I voted against these bills, it was when there was critical flaws or constitutional issues. And, you know, some people can say they're a constitutional conservative, but I put it into practice when I vote on a bill on the floor of the Senate.
Not true, Ken.
I
gotta say, you know, this was a continuing resolution that was going to go to the people, and you didn't want the people to make that decision. The people, in my opinion, were intelligent enough to realize that they didn't want their mileage tracked. They didn't want to have to report their mileage, because the next step, if the government, municipalities, county, city, towns were allowed to require you to turn in your mileage, that's what that continuing resolution would have done, is prohibited that. And the people would have voted that way. But your one vote with the Democrats prevented that continuing resolution from going to the people for a vote. And that's a problem. I would have supported it. I think it would have done a great job. And if the electric vehicles are a consideration, all you have to do is implement a tax at the time of the registration of the vehicle on electric vehicles that would be applied solely to offset the gasoline tax that gasoline using vehicles that they're paying. So it could be done very simply. It could be offset. And I think the people are smart enough to have made that decision. And I know they would have voted against having to report their mileage.
And I didn't support them having to report their mileage either. So you know that that's a misstatement on your place.
Okay,
So
I want to give
I have
your senator too. Thoughts?
There's another guy that wants to chime in.
Well, I mean, it is a three-way debate, right? So I think that what has happened here is we have mixed the factual with the theoretical. I have certain problems with the bill that Senator Bennett voted against. I am not a fan of tracking the movement of people. That is antithetical to the United States, to the American experience. However, we already swear to a whole lot of information that goes in. For example, you tell your insurance company every year or every half year when you renew your insurance, how many miles, because they're going to ask you, your insurance rates are dependent upon it. How many miles did you drive this last year? Well, about 24,000 miles. Okay, great. This is your rate. What about 36,000 miles? Well, your rate goes up a little bit, because the more you're on the road, the more you're going to, the more insurance you're going to pay. So I think there's a pathway to do what the bill was trying to do without taxing people. based upon reporting. And that's one of the reasons why I have mixed feelings about it. We have given the electric vehicle owners a pass for as long as I've been in the legislature. In fact, even before. So there's been discussion about, and this is all theoretical, by the way. This isn't factual. This is theoretical. A tire tax. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's what actually puts damage, if you will, on the roadways. The weights of the vehicles, all those things. So I think that there's another way to go about it. And I don't know that the bill that was being promoted was fully developed yet. I'd like to see a whole lot more work on that, but the time has come because many of our roads are falling apart. And, one of the things we have to remember is with the increasing cost of gasoline, there's also an increasing cost of gas tax because it is directly related to the cost of the gas, not the amount of gas.
Whoa, no, Mark.
I'm sorry, it's the other way around. It's how much gas you buy, okay? Not what you're paying for it. So your cost on tax is static, even though the cost of maintaining those roads is constantly on the increase.
All right. So since we all just picked on Senator Bennett, I wanna move to you next, Representative Finchem. It's a similar kind of structure to this question. You are a longtime Pima County lawmaker who seemingly just moved up north to run for this office. I wonder why residents of the Prescott area of Yavapai County should trust you to represent their region.
Well, I've only heard that from a handful of, I believe, Zipperman folks who have simply said, oh, well, he's a newcomer to the area. Well, I moved up there a year ago. I moved my business there. I was recruited to run for office, not because who in their right mind is going to upend their entire household and move into an area and then sign up to run for a business that's going to take away. I'm still employed. I'm not fully retired. I work. So for somebody to say, well, he's going to move up here just to run for office, that is probably the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Now, there may be some people that do that, but usually that's in the congressional circles. That's the people who are making $168K a year because they're running for Congress. Now, I've always been a part of the communities that I live in, whether it was the Berry County Fair Board or in Oro Valley. I was recruited to run there because I was a vocal person about standing up for my neighbors. All right. I had members of the Senate that came to me, members of the House of Representatives that came to me months after I had moved up there, up into Prescott, to say, hey, we're not happy with one of our colleagues, and we would like you to consider running because we don't think that in the last election, the other individual really has a chance. Now, those are the realities of decision making, okay? Now, I don't know if Mr. Zipperman has a chance. I don't know if Mr. Bennett has a chance. At the end of the day, a year's worth of living in a community ought to be worth something. But to claim that, oh, well, he moved up here for, and it's not about the money, understand that, but he moved up here for a $25,000 a year job to represent the people. I mean, for crying out loud, the county supervisors make 3 times that. And they don't have to go to Phoenix for a third of their life. Now, it's not about the money, but for somebody to make that kind of an assertion that I moved up there to run for office is beyond absurd. I don't have to run for this office. I run because I want to make sure that the people, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing when I've lived there for a year. The things that I'm hearing, the things that I'm seeing, I think we can do better. And that's why I decided to run after being encouraged to do so by many of my former colleagues.
Okay. Mr. Zipperman, Senator Bennett, either of you want to respond to that?
Well, I have a document in front of me. I have it right here. It's called the 2024 Annual Report for the Election Fairness Institute, Inc. And it says that Mr. Finchem is the CEO of that entity and that his address is in Surprise, Arizona. That's a different address from the address. I'm sorry, his address is on 20th Street in Phoenix. And that's a different address. That's a different address from the one in Surprise, which is the one that's associated. They're different addresses. And so neither one of those addresses is here in Yavapai County.
Well,
And
with all due
so-
respect to Mr. Zipperman, that's my office address. That's not my home address.
Well, okay, that's fine. But you have an office down in Phoenix or Surprise, whichever of these addresses it is, but you're running to represent Yavapai County. And the question is what connections you have with this community. I have a lot of connections with this community. I'm on the hospital district board for Yavapai County. I'm also on the Board of Adjustments and Appeals. I've been on those boards for quite a while now, several years. And I have a lot of ties. I own property, real property in this community. I intend to die here. This is my home. And I don't see that when I look at what you're proposing to do. My understanding was that you were going to be running for the recorder's office down in Maricopa County. And then very quickly you dropped that to come up here. There are articles published to that effect. Anybody
Okay.
can go on the internet and find them.
So, Hank, enough with the fake news already. It was never my intention to run for anything in Maricopa County. It is the most corrupt county in the state.
Sir,
So for
did-
Mr. Zipper to make that kind of an assertion.
Mark, you requested a packet. You requested a packet from Maricopa County to run for Maricopa County Recorder.
For a friend of mine. It wasn't for me. They wanted me to be their campaign manager, for God's sakes. This whole thing is absolutely absurd.
All right. We're closing up on our hour fast, but do want to get to one or two more other questions here. So let's try to keep these succinct as possible. I know each of you could go 2 hours tonight and I credit you for it, but this legislative session, the state legislature, with the help of a handful of Republicans, mostly Democrats, voted to repeal the territorial era abortion law that made abortion illegal in most cases, except for to save the life of the mother. I want to know, do any of you think that was that the right decision or the wrong decision, briefly? And let's start with you, Mr. Zipperman. Should that law have been repealed?
I believe that life begins at conception. I believe in, the right to life, basically. The founding fathers came up with the term life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life being the first one of those. That being the case, it's a very dicey proposition because with the law being repealed, it gives the Democrats a lot more leverage in this upcoming November election. A lot of people will be motivated to vote against the existing law, which basically, because of the repeal of that bill, they'll be more likely to go with a less restrictive abortion law. So anyhow, I think that it was probably the best decision based on my personal feelings. But once again, it's a mixed bag. There's no perfect answer. Abortion is a horrible thing, and coming up with the right where to draw the line, it's not a very pleasant thing. And so a lot of people that voted against that repeal, I think the repeal was probably okay because it made it less likely that the Democrats will be able to capitalize on it in November. And that's basically my position on it.
Okay, Representative Finchem, had you been there?
Well, quite frankly, I took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That doesn't mean I get to pick and choose what parts of the Constitution I like or don't like. I think that vote was the wrong vote. We have a responsibility as the legislature to stand up for all of the individuals that are listed in our Constitution. That means our posterity, our children's children's children, those who have not even been conceived of. It's our responsibility to protect their general welfare, and I think it was the wrong decision. And I'd like to correct Mr. Bennett on this. I didn't pull a packet. I sent an email asking what are the terms and conditions for somebody to run for recorder of Maricopa County. That's because I was going to be somebody's campaign manager who decided not to get in the fray. So what he said was a misrepresentation.
Right. Senator Bennett?
I am 100% pro-life. I voted against the repeal because the alternative would go to 15 weeks. I think that's too late. I'm a heartbeat and brain waves. Life begins. That's usually in the 8 to 9 week range. But I actually believe opposite of what Steve said. I believe if the Arizona voters have a choice between the 1864 near total ban, no exception even for rape or incest, or the Abortion Access Act, as they're calling it, which allows abortions right up until the end, I think that has a better chance of passing. At the 15-week law that Ducey signed a couple of years ago that will be in effect now that that 1864 ban has been repealed, I think we have a much better chance of defeating the Unlimited Abortion Access Act that I think is unconscionable, that would allow abortions by not even medical doctors. Any licensed person, dentists, chiropractors, or whatever, could do abortions under that thing, and they could do them right up until the moments before birth. So I'm 100% pro-life. I voted against the ban because I thought 15 weeks was too long, but I believe that life starts at heartbeat and brainwaves.
Okay.
What I was trying to say, sorry.
All right. We should wrap up, but I cannot let this group get off the line here without talking a little bit about election integrity. And I think the simplest way to ask this question, we could spend a whole night debating election integrity, I'm sure. But I want to know specifically, only one of you is going to win this election. Do the other two, do all three of you, commit to, at the end of this primary election, after all the lawsuits have been settled, after all the dust has settled, to accepting the results of this election, even if it's not you as the victor?
Yes.
Yes,
that was Bennett.
I don't have a problem with it in theory, but it depends on the very specifics of you're asking for a commitment on something that we don't know what's going to come across our desk. And as far as I'm concerned, election integrity is extremely important. And I will accept the results of the election, but there are things like contest provisions in the Arizona revised statutes. There are things that are there for specific reasons. And you're asking us to just blindly say, no matter what happens, we're going to follow that person. There may be reasons to contest an election. I'm not saying that I won't.
You have every right to contest an election,
but I will
at the end
accept
of
the
day,
winner
that
of the
court
election
case
ultimately.
will end, and you will either win or lose the court case. And when all those cases are settled, you're fine not being the winner.
Yes, I will support the winner.
Representative Finchem, can you say this?
I've been pretty deep in this. So for the last several years, in fact, we're still in courts over the last one.
Yeah.
But I have every reason to believe that Michelle Burchell is doing a fabulous job in running Yavapai County and the staff that runs Yavapai County elections. So I have a great deal of confidence that at least Yavapai County will be one of the bright lights in the state of Arizona for elections. And provided there are no violations of campaign contest law, absolutely, I would accept the result.
Okay. All right. 3 for 3 on that one. All right, gentlemen, you have been great sports about this whole thing. We should probably move on to the closing remarks. And I believe we started with Mr. Bennett last time. So why don't we move that rotation around a little bit, and Mr. Zipperman, kick us off, would you?
Well, thank you very much. I've been a business owner on several occasions, several different businesses. I think that our government should run a little more like a business, where what you bring in is offset what you spend, that there is a relationship between the two. You don't spend more than you bring in. I think that our government in this state needs some help. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be off the couch getting involved in this politics. I don't like politics, but I find myself compelled to get involved because the average person isn't being listened to. I'm very much about listening to we the people. The Declaration of Independence, when Jefferson penned it, what he said is all power of government is derived from consent of the governed. That puts me as an elected official subservient to and basically serving the needs of the people. And I don't think that's being done very effectively right now. I think that we need to listen to the people a lot more. And honestly, I see myself as one of the people. I don't see myself as anyone special. I have some skills that I've developed over the years. I want to use them to help the people. And I believe that I'm going to win this election, and I think the people are going to speak. Basically, they're not happy with the way government is operating right now either. And that's why I decided to get involved in politics and in seeking this position. I would appreciate the vote of the people watching, and that's about all I've got to say. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Senator Bennett, give us your closing thoughts tonight.
There's a lot of things being said by my opponents about my record. It's a record that has earned the endorsements in this race of the Arizona Police Association, the Professional Firefighters of Arizona, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Arizona Tech Council, the Arizona Nurses Association, Multi-Housing Association, the Fraternal Order of Police, the Academy of Family Physicians. I was Arizona Senator of the Year from the Arizona County School Superintendents, Champion Award from the Arizona League of Cities and Towns that wants to make sure that legislators respect local control. That's where I started, as I mentioned. 100% score from the Arizona Citizens Defense League, which looks out for our Second Amendment, A-rated by the NRA, and 100% score on pro-life issues from Center for Arizona Policy Action. But the most important endorsement I cherish is the endorsements of the Yavapai County voters, the people that I work for, and I'm down there fighting for them, and I'm asking for your vote so that I can continue to fight for you. And I appreciate you tuning in tonight, and I ask for your vote, and thank you very much. My website is kenbennettforsenate.com. Bennett's 2 N's, 2 T's. So thank you all for tuning in, but I think that list of endorsements and awards gives you a breadth of the steadfast conservative nature that I've always exhibited as an elected official and a servant of the people.
They're all lobbyists that you take money from. Thank you.
That is not true, Steve. I didn't interrupt your closing statement. I'm sorry you felt like you had to interrupt mine.
All right. Former Representative Finchem, why don't you take the last word here?
Thank you. I think that was out of line. Closing statements are reserved for the candidate. That was out of line. I've been blessed to be endorsed by a number of individuals and organizations. The NRA, I have an A+ rating, have had for years. Life member of the NRA. Center for Arizona Policy. The state Arizona Republican Assembly, ASRA. Most important, and perhaps some of the most cherished endorsements, are that of President Trump, not just for the earlier Secretary of State race that I ran 2 years ago, but also for this race. And the Trump Organization evaluated all 3 candidates for their history, for their stand on a number of things. It's a vetting process that goes through all 3 people. Also vetted by General Mike Flynn, endorsed by him. Former ICE Director Tom Homan, endorsed by him. That's the trifecta of 3 of the most honorable men that I've ever met in my life. And I ask for your vote because they have confidence that I'll pursue an America First policy agenda for the people of Arizona that will feed into holding Congress accountable, because power arises from the people. Some of these jokers would have us believe that our rights and the power resides at the top. No, it comes from the people. And I've heard people say, well, this person's seat or that person's seat. No. We are but transitory magistrates. We are there to occupy a seat. We are placed there, but that seat belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to any one elected official. That's why we have elections every 2 years. As Mark Twain said, politicians are like diapers. They need to be changed every 2 years, and for the same reason. I ask for your vote beginning this week. Ballots will be arriving. I believe they drop in the mail tomorrow. They'll be arriving Friday, Saturday, and throughout the coming weeks. I urge you to go vote in person. Don't vote by mail. And if you're going to use a mail-in ballot, deliver it in person. But I believe in voting on Election Day, and that's where I'll be on the 30th of July. I hope to see you there. VoteFinchem.com is my website if you want to know more about me. But I think it says a lot for President Trump, General Mike Flynn, and Tom Homan to endorse me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. This concludes the end of the Senate portion of our debate. We're going to take a few minutes off and come back with a House candidate. To our candidates, we thank you so much for participating. This is not mandatory, so it shows good character that y'all are willing to spend your time on a Tuesday night doing this. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the July 30 primary election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. And again, thank you, gentlemen. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We just concluded the portion of the debate with our Senate candidates, the candidates for the GOP nomination for the state Senate in Legislative District 1. Now we're moving on to the House candidate, or in this case, House candidate. In the House races, you get to pick two candidates to represent you. Tonight, we have with us Shawn Wildman. Representative Quang Nguyen and Selina Bliss were invited, but could not attend tonight. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us here, Shondell, and I'll give you a few moments to just introduce yourself to voters.
Hello, thank you, Hank, and thank you to the Clean Elections Commission. This is a real privilege to participate. Thank you for having me. Just a little bit about me. I've lived in Yavapai County since 1994, been in Arizona since 1981. My husband and I have been married since, well, we were high school sweethearts, so 42 years now. We have 3 children, homeschooled them, and they've grown up here in Yavapai County, enjoying the freedoms and the movement and the ability to just have kind of a rural, open life, free to be educated according to their interests and their parents' interests, and freedom to ride their quads and learn to ride their dirt bikes and work on ranches and things like that. So we're very privileged to have been able to raise them here. We have owned our own business here in this county for 21 years. We purchased a business that has been in existence since 1978. It's a print publication named Coffeegram. A lot of people have enjoyed it for a long, long time. And we counted a privilege to have had the business here. And we just find that my husband is very supportive of the opportunity that is before me to run for this position. And it's a chance for us to give back to our community that has been so good to us.
Cool. Well, pleasure to meet you. Since it's just you and I, we'll keep this informal. I want to run through some of the questions that we were just talking about with the Senate candidates and a few unique ones. But let's again start with the state budget. As you know, this year, the state lawmakers cut a lot of money out of that budget to make ends meet after overspending last year. And I want to ask you the same thing. What, in your opinion, were the most damaging cuts in that budget, and what areas of government should or could have been cut deeper?
Well, because I have not served yet in that position, there is information and experience that I don't have with that. However, owning a business, I do understand it's been tough for everybody, and we've had to cut back in our own business to be able to keep the business solvent. The crash of 2008 was hard for us. The COVID was very hard for us. And by the grace of God, we're still here. And so I know what it is to have to cut back. And so when it's, necessary to cut back, sometimes hard decisions have to be made. And I did appreciate Representative Finchem's approach that by the time he left office, the budget was balanced and there was a surplus because they just put their shoulder to the wheel and got it done. So I support that.
Okay. What about repealing some tax cuts in order to make the budget ends meet? Is that something that you would be willing to consider, or is that a non-starter with you?
Tax cuts, I believe, are a good thing. I also believe that we have, we all live in a budget. We do. We have to live on a budget. It doesn't matter how much money or properties or whatever else we have. We cannot outspend our income. And so sometimes things have to go. And our taxes have gone up, and it's become, as a small business owner, it has pretty well choked us throughout the years. We have to just do our best to budget for that. And sure enough, it's gone up. We have to pay more. And it just seems like to allow small business to thrive, there need to be some benefit to not having to pay so much taxes. So I like the idea of working with what we have, and smaller government, in my opinion, is a good thing also. We don't necessarily need all the positions filled. And again, I haven't gone to the other side, been in the chambers and understand how all the things work, but I'm very interested in looking at what we might be able to do to put more money back in the pockets of the people, because we are just taxed beyond what's reasonable, in my opinion.
Taxed enough already. Wasn't that the rallying cry from a decade or so ago?
Yes, or perhaps all the way back to 1776.
Guess it started before that, probably, huh?
Did.
All right. I want to move on to immigration stuff. And let me ask you kind of a big picture question. What is the role of a state lawmaker regarding Arizona's border with Mexico? And what can you, if elected to that position, do to strengthen border security?
Well, I would support whatever measures that are constitutional. I am a constitutionalist. And so I would do whatever is available to me to do to support the Constitution. I have a lovely story, and I will make it very short, but a lovely story. I met a woman who is a small business owner in our community. She is a Mexican national who came through the front door, worked very hard to get her citizenship. She's very proud to be here. She insisted that she and her husband and her family learn to speak English. And she was, one of the greatest moments in her life was when she was in New York on Times Square. She was there for the 2016 election. She was staying in Trump Tower. She was standing right over Times Square. And in the middle of the night, her husband woke her up and he said, "Look outside, look outside." It is the proudest moment of her life to be there, to have experienced that, to walk amongst the New Yorkers and celebrating that Trump won. This is a woman who understands what it is to work hard, come through the front door, and play by our rules, which includes rule of law. So I'm a supporter of rule of law. And if there are things we need to look at again, I'm willing to take a look at that. But rule of law, otherwise, again, we don't have a country.
And is it safe to assume that you also plan to support HCR 2060 on the November ballot?
I need to take a closer look, but anything we can do to increase the teeth, because the thing about the lawless entries, the point of entries, we have children involved. Children are being trafficked. They're coming across without their parents for whatever reason, however that's working. They're coming across without their children, without their parents, and they're disappearing. And this has to stop. It has to stop. It's unconscionable. And we as American citizens, those people, the children and the people that are coming across illegally, do not have the same protections and rights that we do. They end up in very dangerous situations. They end up in sometimes never heard from again. And then there's the lawlessness that might be committed by those who come with an intent to commit lawlessness against we the people or other people living here. So teeth to support that we have points of entry and ports of entry. We welcome the port of entry, lawful abiding of our entry laws. So that's where I am with that.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about abortion. In your opinion, should abortion be illegal in all or almost all cases, legal in most cases? So where do you draw the line? Where do you think the state of Arizona should draw the line?
Well, I am very strongly pro-life. Again, a quick story about that. My beginnings were precarious. My parents were not married. It was early 1960s in the South. And my father was married to someone else and in the military. And so this was not a good situation. And they went across the border to seek a Mexican abortion because it was not legal in the US. If it had been legal in the US, I would not be here today. My children and our future generations would not be here today. I wouldn't have 42 beautiful years with my husband today. So this is, I feel strongly, and my understanding is that life begins at conception, and that it is part of who I am to defend life, all ages and stages. I understand from time to time a A baby may need to be taken from the mother's womb to save the mother, but we have wonderful technology nowadays. And if it's possible to get the baby to viability before it is separated from the mother, I'd like to look at that. But I don't think we can do a blanket statement to say all things must be all things, but if there is any way possible to save the life of a child and let them contribute to society and grow up, just like Representative Finchem was saying, that is our posterity, and the Constitution does list that as something that we hold as value in our country historically.
And I want to drill down a little bit further. What about cases of rape and incest? Are you okay with exemptions to abortion bans for those instances, or purely to save the life of the mother?
There are heinous crimes committed against people, children and women, and those same kinds of heinous crimes are sometimes committed against little boys and older children and all kinds of people. And it's not right. It's not right, and I understand that. I do so strongly believe in life that it would be, in my opinion, and I've been counseled to not go deep into this, but I'm just going to share my heart, that if there is a way to get the child to a place where it can be separated safely from the mother, that would be my first hope. Now, I don't know exactly what all that means. I know that I'm very grateful to have had life, and I would have been one of those statistics, but it didn't look good on paper for a lot of reasons to have had a chance to live. So I feel strongly.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about education. I'm curious if you think Arizona's K-12 public education system as a whole is adequately funded. Does it need more money? Does it have too much money? How do you think we're doing on that front?
I think we have a faulty understanding, a faulty belief system that says more money equals more success. And any business that you can take a look at the books, more money does not necessarily equal more success. Spending smartly equals more success. And having accountability, once we started teaching to pass a test, the students' actual education went down. And we had other kinds of curriculum that came in that also hasn't been supportive of the student when they graduate from high school. Some of them will be interested in trade school, some will be interested in further education, and some of them will go right from high school into the workforce. They need to be able to comprehend even complicated documents like our founding documents, our charters of freedom. And that's written in a tough language if someone's not willing to help them understand. It's not our everyday speaking language. So I don't believe that more money equals a better education. I believe good stewardship of the money that's being spent. And I would like to see money that's maybe being spent on policies that don't actually support education, but supports ideology and agenda. That could be applied to education.
Okay, let me ask then a kind of similar question, different angle here. How much do you think a first-year teacher in your local school district should earn?
A whole lot more. In my school district, we cannot. It's unconscionable. I want to hang my head when the teachers are telling me that they can't make enough money. I've heard also that in our whole county, we can't draw in the kind of teachers with the skill set and the interest in the students' actual education rather than ideology, because the pay is so low. And so that affects everything. We can't get technology brought in here, staffing for technology. We can't get medical people to come in because they're looking at our schools and saying, my kid's not going to be in that school. So We need to pay teachers more and offer them incentives for staying and support them in what they need to do to be, I don't know if I'm going to say better teachers, because I think mostly teachers have a heart to share education with children, but to support them as they grow as a person and as they grow in interest. The more we can support them, the more they can support our children. I homeschooled my children. The youngest did for high school. He went to a charter school, actually two charter schools. Then he ended up in a local high school because he just must play football. He must. And so he did, and he enjoyed that. It was good for him. My other children, they finished up their homeschool through the local college, and that was a blessing for them. And so I know there's not one education system that fits all students and families, but for the parents to have the ability to choose what works best for their children, we could possibly save money by more people homeschooling their children. You know, they get a budget to work with, and if they can stay within that budget, those children may be able to get things like music lessons, art lessons, dance lessons that the school cannot afford.
I wanted to ask you about ESAs. I'm curious now. Do your children use ESAs? Was that part of your homeschooling process? No. Okay.
We funded ourselves. My husband worked very hard, picked up extra overtime whenever he could when we bought books. We started homeschooling in the early 80s. We were early adopters to that. And the only curriculum available was what schools bought. And so we had to pay school prices for teacher books and student books and all the materials. It was very expensive. It was a sacrifice that we were very happy to make, and we'd do it again.
I assume as a Republican, you're in favor of the universal ESA program that lawmakers passed a few years back.
I do like the idea of parents choosing where the students are educated. So I also know some homeschooled students that decided they would like to be in the orchestra, but be homeschooled. And so to be able to pick and choose from their local public school or charter school or private school, if they want to put together some sort of a combination, a montage of educational sources, I absolutely support that. My children were very inquisitive, very bright, very eager to learn things that were interesting to them. They've gone out into the big world and have continued to explore those interests that would not have been an option for them if they'd just come right up through the school system. They would have burned out. All three of them would have burned out, and we would be looking at very different futures for them than we do today.
I wonder if you think that we should have any reforms within the ESA program. Like, one of the big arguments at the Capitol right now is, you know, we've extended this to every child in Arizona is now eligible for a school voucher at ESA. But the schools that they attend are not held to kind of those same standards that public schools are when it comes to background checks for teachers or other public, other teaching standards, for example. Do you think we need to look at that as a state if we are allowing everyone to take advantage of this program? Are there enough guardrails around it, essentially?
Well, that's interesting. My personal perspective is that less government is better. That, you know, our founding fathers told us that freedom is dangerous. And if we have the freedom to choose, we also have the freedom to fail. Our freedoms, our Constitution gives us the right to fail. We are not guaranteed the right to succeed. Now, a wise person will make wise decisions, and that will benefit the children. At some point, most children, I believe, enjoy learning. They may not enjoy the learning that they are exposed to. They may not enjoy the subject matter they're exposed to, but children are wired to learn, to grow, to explore. And at some point, they will be pulling on their parents' coattails and saying, this isn't working for me. Let's try something else. And children are also resilient. Now, I'm not recommending what I'm about to tell you, but I do know of a woman, a family that had several children, homeschooled them, and she decided with her youngest, which was a boy, to not sit him down to books. She let him play and explore and romp and ride his bike and go into trees and explore the world around him. About the age that other children would be in 6th grade, he came to her and said, "Mom, I am ready to get into the books." And he bypassed the students his own age, and he outdid them by far on the test scores. And he did very well as life went on, because not every child is ready to sit down at the books in kindergarten. And that mom was wise. She didn't burn her son out, and he learned the world around him and how to get along and explore and be curious. And that's an important factor in education, being curious.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit about water and housing. These are two pressing issues across Arizona. I know, especially in your neck of the woods, housing prices are not what they used to be, and the aquifers aren't either. So I guess let me ask this really broadly. What would your solution to Arizona's water crisis be? And I don't expect or want a, end all be all solution to this, but do you have thoughts on where we should take our water policy, of little improvements that we can make? Because it's going to take 1 billion of those to solve this problem in the long term.
Correct. I do know. So I spoke with Mr. Goslar. Trying to think, the days are going so quickly. I spoke with him recently, and he's very excited about a new idea that he's wanting to try. It sounded very interesting to me, and I'm not sure I'm at liberty to explain it here. But there are some really good things.
Tell us, nobody's watching.
It's just that. But there are some good things coming with that. I do have a concern about how much water we allow to leave our state. That's a concern. I don't know what again, I'm not on the inside, but I'm willing to learn. And water has been something we've kept an eye on. My husband and I owned a home with a well. We had to dig the well ourselves. And there was talk at that time of putting meters on the wells and government monitoring, how much you use. And I'm not inclined to be agreeable with that, but I do think there are things we can do, such as leaving Arizona water in Arizona. That would be helpful. I also live in a town where there's a moratorium on new water hookups, and has been for many, 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 many years. In fact, I think since we moved there in 1994, because water's a concern. So a lot of people are hauling water, as you know, they'll bring water in. It's a complicated issue, and there's a lot to learn, and I'm interested in finding out what we can do.
Okay. And when it comes to housing in the Yavapai County area, I guess, one of the big debates at the Capitol this year, lawmakers took a handful of steps to address the housing shortage, things like casitas, allowing anyone within certain cities to put a casita within their property. But one of the big things that didn't really get done was kind of this idea of deregulation of city zoning to kind of spur more development and get more houses. I wonder, just like broadly, do you think that that is a part of the solution to the crisis, doing away with local zoning laws? Or, the other kind of side of the coin is people who see that as like a red herring that diverts attention from other solutions here. Do you think that will get us anywhere? Is that something you would support if sent to the Capitol?
Well, one of the concerns with affordable housing, as you know, so many people are moving here. We're sort of open the floodgate, really, and we're not prepared. Our infrastructure is not prepared to receive the amount of people that are moving in here. And so again, back with just like with schools, the schools are inadequate at this point by and large. I know there are some excellent opportunities for education in our area, but how do we get people to move into our area that can help support the area as far as their skill sets and contribute to our community if the housing isn't affordable, right? So if we want to bring somebody in that's young, maybe they've just finished school or an apprenticeship program, but they have a wonderful skill set that would be a blessing to us. How do we bring them in with housing having jumped so high? So I'll speak to the fact that my youngest son actually had to leave the area because it didn't matter that he worked very hard. He was paid not as well as he probably should have been for his work. And I'm not saying that as a mom, I'm just looking at what people in his industry were making at the time. He had to leave the state to find affordable housing. Found a great job in another state with a fabulous house that costs probably half of what it would have cost here. So you're right, it is a crisis, coming to a crisis moment. We cannot afford to just let housing keep going. But this is what happens when we have people at the helm that are not listening, and taxes are going up and our money is being spent where it shouldn't be spent, and people don't have the paycheck to do what they need to do as a result. So there's a lot to look at there. It's a complicated thing. I know there's a concern for people who live in some areas where there's low cost housing just popping up, the little bungalows or whatever you want to call them, small houses on very tiny lots that are going to be for rent forever. And then the concern is they come in where the rent isn't expensive, but they just keep jacking it up and up and up. And those people at some point aren't going to be able to afford that. And we also have a homeless problem. The greatest population of new homeless is our elderly. They just can't make it anymore. So we have a lot to address in this county. We sure do.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about elections. How would you evaluate the integrity and fairness of the 2020 presidential elections and the 2022 midterms? Do you think they were free and fair?
I think some parts of it were very free. I do. And other parts of it, not fair. That's my opinion. That is my opinion. I don't feel like my particular vote was well represented. It was actually at my polling station. There was a confrontation from one of the poll workers that did not want to receive a ballot that I had brought to drop in the box, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good. So I would like to see the elections be paper ballots. You know, we used to do that. And instead of having polling centers, can we have precincts that are small? And then the ballots can be counted by hand, and results can be given very quickly. I heard Representative Finchem one time speak about the whole country of Norway can get their ballots on paper and counted that day, and they can have a result. And so, call me old school, but it seems like Vince went more honestly with that system.
Let me ask, do you think that Governor Katie Hobbs and President Joe Biden won their elections?
Well, I don't.
Okay. Okay. And I guess one of the big things I'm curious about is given the significant debate within the Republican Party over the legitimacies of election results, do you commit to conceding your race if the elections officials and the courts determine that you have not won?
I would have to agree with Mr. Zipperman and Mr. Finchem that if we knew that things were done above board and all was clear and clean and free, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, we ran through most of the things and we're coming up on the half-hour mark here. So why don't we move on to some closing thoughts? If you wanted the voters to take away something from this conversation, what would you like them to remember?
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for staying with us. It was, especially those who stayed from the beginning. It's been a bit of an evening, but I would like each of you to remember that it is my interest to represent you and not my interest. I do understand that the seat that I'm going for belongs to the people where the power is, and my office would be open to hear from you. Unless I hear from folks, I don't necessarily know all the things that are going on that would be helpful to know. I would like to just interject that I am endorsed by Representative Miss Judy Burgess. We are very like-minded. My husband and I held an FFL for many years, very strong on the Second Amendment, very strong on defending life, all ages and stages, and our veterans. I think we can do way better with our veterans. We have to remember that they are family. They're our fathers and our brothers and our uncles and nephews and nieces and daughters, and they should be treated as family. It would be a privilege to represent each of you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Ms. Wildman. We appreciate you taking your evening to chat with us. And to the voters who took the time to watch this, again, thank you so much. The primary is coming up July 30th. Ballots will be in your mailbox soon. And go to azcleanelections.gov for all the official, accurate voting information that you may need. Thanks again, Ms. Wildman.
Could I add
Okay.
my website is
Yeah, throw it out there.
Wildman and the number 4 house.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's where we get more intel. Okay, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Good evening.
Bye.